The And Terry Show podcast series continues as my good friend Jim is unable to make it, or rather I am unable to make it for our regularly scheduled podcast. So in lieu of getting together, here's a series to keep you up to date on things Jim and I would have been talking about. In this podcast, continuing on with the theme of what do you know, how do you know, what's a fact checker, things you believe, confirmation bias, all of that kind of stuff. Maybe it's in the realm of when is education not education, but indoctrination? When is freedom of speech actually hate speech and not freedom of speech? And if you're powerful and rich, can you get away with anything? Like shooting someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and having no one prosecute you. Words from Donald Trump. Do you remember those? Yeah, lots of stuff in the news to question and raise. And I'm going to start with this one because it's close to home. A pro-Palestinian rally, possibly Palestinian youth group protest. The rally, I'm not sure. I think it was, this is now early in the week. I'm not sure if it was on the weekend, so a couple of days ago. But it made the rounds on social media of a young boy leading with a microphone. So it's one of those staged protests where the audience is all literally up in arms. Up in arms, meaning arms up. Yeah, gesturing. Upwards, striking the sky. And the words were kind of controversial, No, absolutely controversial, which takes me to, is education indoctrination? Because the little lad is dressed in Palestinian garb, the headscarf that they wear. I forget what they call it. But he is leading back and forth, much like you would have a recitation in a church or any other religious gathering where you get people, or perhaps a strike and protest, and auto workers would do the same style, where you give someone a mic and they get the crowd riled up and you repeat back and forth. Only this one is long live the intifada, intifada, intifada. Okay, what are we talking about when we have I may be underestimating the young lad's age, but he looks to be, 10 maybe. So elementary school age. What? Yeah, being used? Yeah, I'd say if you've got a kid up there doing stuff, you are using a child. Which is, maybe call me a little old school and old fashioned, but that's a form of child abuse, I would think. No. Yeah, anybody out there agree or disagree? Yeah, so you've seen that clenched fist, and because it's, wintertime in Toronto, the hand has got a black glove on it. Of course, the black glove is reminiscent of all kinds of not so good movements. Clenched fist, extended arm straight up outwards. It's not a good look when you're talking about freedom. Freedom to what? You have the right to protest. Yes, you have the right to say all kinds of things. But people in the audience looking at this have the right as well to assess, perhaps even judge, and come to their own conclusions. Remember, this is Canada. This is not the stuff we usually see, I don't think. Call me old school and old generation, but our protests were peaceful protests and, Occupy the Dean's office kind of stuff. And then I guess it's graduated into other things. But when you normalize what I would call fascism or authoritarianism at best, when you start to say violence is a way forward, terrorism is the solution, I'm not sure that that's a good message. Long live the resistance. There is only one solution. Intifada revolution. Long live the intifada, intifada, intifada. The boy who was cheered by a crowd. Cheered by a crowd. So we take a look at the photo that's posted. And yeah, it's not a good look when young people, women, a lot of women in the audience are cheering this on. What? This is kind of hard to understand. The demonstration apparently was organized by several groups, including Toronto for Palestine, Palestinian Youth Movement. The PYM I've had questions about for a little while. Well, for a while. Yeah, not too sure about what their agenda is outside of creating chaos and havoc and justifying terrorism. But that's just my perspective as a older, peaceful, loving Canadian. I'm not sure that these are anything but really fostering hate. So far from being pro-Palestinian, they are actually hate rallies. I found the video myself to be really off-putting, disturbing even. But from what I've seen for it's 3 weeks now. This has been the usual. Hate has been the fuel. When I saw Toronto, Montreal erupt in flag waving and car honking and what I would have called a trucker rally in Montreal and Toronto with cars honking and Palestinian flags flying on October 7th, what were you celebrating then? And I already did a podcast on this. It struck me with an alarm bell ringing. Not quite a 4-alarm or 5-alarm fire yet, but it's smoldering. And I'm wondering how this got transplanted, because it is not indigenous to Canada. This is not necessarily, it has its place as a left-wing, lift up the underdog kind of protest, but the turn it's taking in academia, when you find people in university campuses and colleges across Canada and the United States, in the UK especially, France, democracies which allow these protests to take place, is the irony of the whole thing, while promoting hate. There you go. You're free in Canada to rally, to protest, and apparently you're even free to promote hate. At least that seemed to be the message. And I'm not sure whether you need to separate this out. If you are celebrating terrorism, you are promoting hatred. If you are glorifying October 7th, you are promoting hatred. If you are ignoring the reality and denying that women were raped, mutilated, sexually traumatized, and then killed, then you are promoting hate. And that takes me from the Toronto rally and the young boy with the microphone, whose my advice would be drop the mic before you get into this too deep. That is a form of abuse in my opinion. But I'm moving on now. Moving on to the case of academics. And I'm thinking of a woman who was in I'm going to say it's the University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton. And she was in a department or a university initiative that was talking about supporting women who were sexually abused, the sexual rights of women, protecting women who are victims of sexual assault, that she signed on behalf of the university, that she is hired by, this letter that said there was no raping of Israeli women on October the 7th. A statement that was endorsed by a lot of academics and institutions of higher learning. And unfortunately, that is just straight up anti-Semitic. There is no truth in that claim, as has been demonstrated by the many presentations of the video evidence presented both to the U.S. Congress. I'm not sure it was presented to the Canadian Parliament. I would hope so, because it's important. These protests are in Canada too, so the Canadian Parliament, representing all Canadians, should have a look at what is being claimed by these organizations and root out, did I say that? Canada's a free country, so you have the right to say stuff, but if you add your name and academic credentials to something, I'm not sure that it's going to end well for you. So, yeah, claiming that there was no abuse, no sexual assault, no rape, no mutilation on October the 7th, and you put your name to it representing an academic institution in the United States, in Canada, wherever you are, there's something wrong. When you belong to an institution like that and you're ripping down posters that offend you because, what, they're posters of the hostages taken on October 7th. That is denying the reality, and that to me is a hate crime as well. Leave the stuff alone. If it offends you, don't look at the post. What are you doing tearing the stuff down? It's really a public service reminder that there are hostages still taken. I find the whole thing troubling. And to see it take place on the streets of Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, Vancouver, all of the major cities in Canada seem to have their academic institutions taken over. Maybe, is that the right word when you voluntarily decide to associate with something that's maybe not right? You think it is because you're a lefty. I'm a lefty. I want to support people who are underdogs and downtrodden. Even Jesus said to support the orphans and widows. So I'm thinking, yeah, this is good. But when you say that your way of doing it is to create more hatred, then I have an issue. Your right to free speech stops when it impacts my life. Just like your right to make your own vaccine choices stops when your anti-vax status impedes my ability to stay well. Remember the outbreak, 2021? Do you remember the vaccine development, the anti-vaxxers? Remember JFK Jr.? Remember all the trouble that we're having? Measles on the rise? More deaths from measles in the last few years on a disease that should have been eradicated. Why? Because vaccine doubting the science, has now become a thing. When truth doesn't matter, when science doesn't matter, we are in a bad place, in my opinion. But what do I know? I just surf the news and find stuff that I find, I wonder why they said that. Headlines that may be misrepresenting things, the omission of things, the emphasis on one thing, the omission on other things. But then even St. Paul said that, didn't he? I do the things I don't want to do. I don't do the things I ought to do. Well, that's sort of like doctoring up the Leeds headline in a New York Times article on the pro-Palestinian movement. Leaving stuff out, is it intentional or just oversight? More to talk about. The Jim and Terry Show. Bye-bye.